1,000 years ago, a young woman was buried in England. Her name is gone. Her coffin is gone. But her skull came out of the ground almost whole. When an archaeologist turned the jaw to the light, the teeth were still sitting in it, a full set, barely a cavity in her head. She never saw a dentist. She never held a toothbrush because the toothbrush had not reached her world yet. And by one hard measure, her teeth were in better shape than yours are right now. But look closer at that same bone, and it tells a second story, one that will leave you grateful for the dentist you have been dreading. Tonight we are going to read a medieval mouth like a book. We will find out why these people had so few cavities and what was destroying their teeth instead. Then the exact stretch of history when European mouths began to rot, and whether better is an honest word at all. Start with the thing that stops archaeologists in their tracks. When you dig up a medieval cemetery, the ordinary working people, the farmers and labourers and their families, you brace yourself for a horror show. No dentists, no hygiene as we would recognise it. A short, hard life. And yet, again and again, the skulls come up with clean, whole rows of teeth, and cavities are the exception rather than the rule. Grave after grave, the same picture comes up out of the soil. Not one lucky skull, but whole churchyards full of them, dug from ordinary villages that nobody famous ever came from, and every one of them telling the same quiet story about the mouths of the poor. In some medieval populations, the rate of tooth decay is a small fraction of what a modern dentist sees walking through the door every single day. These were poor people who had never heard the word hygiene. So what were they doing that you are not? To answer that, you have to understand that a mouth is a diary. A tooth is one of the hardest, most stubborn things in the human body, and it keeps a record. It records what you chewed, how hard, for how many years. It records infection as dark craters in the bone around the root. It records decay as the ragged holes we call cavities. An archaeologist can pick up a jaw that has been in the ground for 800 years and read that record almost as clearly as a dentist reads a fresh X-ray. And when they read hundreds of medieval jaws and count the cavities, then compare that count to the mouths of people living now, the gap is enormous. Modern mouths are riddled with decay. Medieval ones, by comparison, are strikingly clean. That gap is the mystery, and the answer to it is almost insultingly simple. The answer is nothing. They were not doing anything, and that turns out to be the entire point, because a cavity is not really about dirt, and it is not about brushing. A cavity is a living process. Your mouth is home to colonies of bacteria, and certain of them have one favourite food: sugar. When you feed them sugar, they pour out acid as their waste, and that acid sits against your enamel and dissolves it, hour after hour, meal after meal, until it eats a hole clean through. No sugar, no acid. No acid, no hole. Brushing helps and floss helps, but they are damage control on a fire that is already burning. The fuel that lights the fire in the first place is sugar. Take the fuel away, and for the most part, the fire simply cannot start. Now look at what a medieval peasant actually ate. Coarse dark bread, day after day, the centre of nearly every meal. Pottage, a thick simmered mess of grains and beans, and whatever the garden gave up. Onions, cabbage, peas, leeks, turnips. A little cheese if the household kept a cow or a few goats. Ale, brewed weak and drunk from morning on instead of risking foul water. Meat when they were lucky, which for most people was not often at all. It was a plain diet, a monotonous one, and in a bad year a hungry one. But look hard at what is missing from that table. There is almost no sugar anywhere in the picture. Nowhere. It is simply not there. Sugar in medieval Europe was not food. It was a rarity, an import carried thousands of miles overland and by sea, so scarce and so costly that it was handled like an exotic spice or weighed out in tiny amounts by apothecaries and sold as medicine for the sick. A common family might live an entire lifetime and never once taste refined sugar. Even honey, the single real sweetener they had, was a luxury with a beekeeper's labour behind every drop, used sparingly on feast days, nothing at all like the flood we swim in now. Their whole world was, by pure accident of poverty, a low-sugar diet enforced from the cradle to the grave, and the bacteria in their mouths never got the meal they needed to rot the teeth. The clean skulls in the ground are not a monument to medieval discipline, they are a monument to medieval scarcity. But before you start envying that young woman in the churchyard, pick her jaw back up, because it has a great deal more to tell you, and the second half of the story is grim. Look at the biting surfaces of those cavity-free teeth, and you notice something strange. They are worn flat, not chipped, not decayed, but ground down, smooth and low, as though someone had taken a file to them, sometimes right down to the yellow-brown layer beneath the enamel. In an older skull, the teeth can be worn nearly to stumps, flat little pegs sitting in the jaw. This was not the odd unlucky case. It was almost universal, and it points straight at the thing that truly wrecked medieval mouths. Not sugar, grit. This is where their daily bread turned traitor. Medieval flour was ground between two great millstones, and those stones shed a constant fine dust of rock and sand into the flour as they turned against each other. On top of that, a grinding stone wears smooth with use and has to be roughened again with a chisel, and every time the miller did that, fresh grit was thrown into the meal. Some grain was ground at home on small handquerns of coarse stone, which were worse. So every loaf that came out of that flour carried a faint invisible load of stone dust baked right into it, which means that every day, at every meal, for an entire lifetime, these people were chewing bread quietly full of sand. It was like taking a bite of fine sandpaper 3 times a day, year after year. And sandpaper, dragged across a tooth 10,000 times a year, does exactly what you would expect it to do. The wear was only the beginning of the misery. As the enamel ground away, the soft living pulp at the centre of the tooth was laid open to the germs of the mouth, and that is an open invitation to infection. Medieval jaws are pocked with abscesses, dark cavities in the bone where infection ate down through the root, the kind of thing that today means an emergency appointment and a course of antibiotics. To them it meant raw agony, a swollen face, sometimes a fever that could turn deadly, and no real treatment except to have the tooth hauled out of the head. There was no gentle dentistry waiting for them. If a tooth had to come out, it was pulled often by a travelling tooth drawer, a barber, or the village blacksmith, with iron pincers and nothing for the pain but drink and a strong grip. A bad tooth was not a checkup. It was a small, brutal surgery you simply had to survive. And the strangest part is how they understood it. When a medieval person felt that deep throbbing ache in a rotten tooth, most of them did not picture acid or sugar or infection. They pictured a worm. For thousands of years, from the ancient world right through the Middle Ages and beyond, people across half the planet believed that toothache was caused by a tiny worm burrowing and gnawing inside the tooth, and that the pain was the creature moving. Healers tried to smoke it out with heated seeds, or coax it into the open with charms and pastes. They were completely wrong, of course. But sit with what that belief tells you. These people had almost no idea what actually eats a tooth. They could not see the real enemy at all, and it did not matter in the slightest, because the real enemy was still mostly absent from their food. They were protected not by knowledge, but by an empty sugar bowl. So already the headline is quietly falling apart. Better teeth, yes, but only in one narrow direction. Fewer holes and far more grinding, infection, and blind, worm-haunted pain. Hold that honest picture in your head, because now we reach the part that actually proves what was going on, and it is the most revealing thing in the whole story. The real reason we can be sure it was sugar and not scrubbing is simple. If cavities truly came from sugar rather than from bad hygiene, then history should show us a clear moment when European teeth suddenly began to rot, and that moment should line up not with people getting lazy, but with sugar getting cheap. And that is exactly what the record shows. For century after century, the clean, worn medieval mouth stayed roughly the same. Then from the 15 and 1600s onward, sugar began pouring into Europe from enormous plantations across the Atlantic, grown and cut at a scale the medieval world could never have imagined. For the first time in human history, sugar became something ordinary people could buy in real quantity. And European teeth began to rot almost the moment it arrived. The most famous mouth in England makes the point better than any chart could. Queen Elizabeth I adored sugar, could afford every grain of it she wanted, and by the later years of her reign, a foreign visitor to her court recorded that her teeth had gone black from sugar, in a royal head that wanted for nothing on earth. Across the same span of years, as sugar spread down from the wealthy toward everyone below them, blackened and rotting teeth spread right along with it, working their way through the whole population. The toothbrush had still barely appeared. Fluoride lay centuries in the future. Nobody's brushing habits had changed at all. The single thing that changed was the sugar, and the teeth rotted on cue. That is about as close to a controlled experiment as history ever hands you. Take the same people, the same near-total lack of dentistry, add one new ingredient to the diet, and watch the mouths fall apart. And that older way of eating, the bread and the grain at the very centre of it, has not been lost. It has been pieced back together, and people are baking it again today. If you want to bake this history instead of just watching it, that is what the Medieval Bakery Collection is for. The Practical Recipes book walks you through the loaves themselves. The Sourdough Manual is for building and keeping a living leaven of your own, the way these bakers did. And the Sourcing Guide tells you where to find the right heritage grain. It is all over at the Medieval Way store. Now, knowing all of that, what did a medieval person actually do to care for their teeth? The answer is more than nothing, but far less than you would think, and not one part of it was the real reason their mouths stayed clean. People chewed on frayed twigs until the ends softened into a kind of brush, and wiped their teeth with a rough linen cloth. They rinsed with vinegar or wine, or with waters brewed from sage, rosemary, mint, and other herbs, hoping to sweeten the breath and dull the ache. The better off scrubbed with tooth powders, gritty mixtures of ground herbs and salt, or of burnt shell, cuttlefish bone, and ash, rubbed onto the teeth with a finger or a rag. Sage leaves and a pinch of salt, worked over the gums, were an old and genuinely sensible standby. A few of these habits did real good, scraping away the daily film in a crude fashion, but none of them was doing the heavy lifting. A peasant who never cleaned his teeth even once in his life still carried far fewer cavities than you do, because the fuel for decay was missing from his plate in the first place. The care was real. The empty sugar bowl is what saved the teeth. There is one last proof, and it was hiding inside the medieval world all along. Not everyone in that world ate the same way. The wealthy could afford honey, candied fruits, and the first thin trickle of imported sugar, along with fine white bread, sifted clean of its coarse brain and grit. And when you examine the remains of higher status medieval people, the ones who sat at the richest and sweetest tables, you often find more decay in their mouths, not less. The lord in his hall, working through soft, sweet delicacies, was quietly rotting his teeth faster than the labourer in his fields, who lived on rough, dark bread and pottage. Same century, same country, same total absence of dentists. The only thing that divided their two mouths was how much sweetness their money could buy, and wherever the sweetness went, the decay followed it like a shadow. And this is the part that reaches straight into your own bathroom this morning. You brush, you floss, at least when you remember. You have fluoride in your toothpaste and very likely in the water running from your tap, an entire arsenal of dental weapons the medieval world could not have dreamed of. And you still get cavities because you are pouring the exact fuel medieval people never had over your teeth all day long. Sugar in your coffee, in your bread, in your sauces, hidden in foods that do not taste sweet at all, and above all, in drinks that are essentially sweetened acid, sipped slowly for hours. And the way we eat it is almost perfectly designed to do damage. The medieval peasant ate 2 or 3 times a day and nothing between, which gave his mouth long, quiet hours to recover. We graze from morning to night, a sweet coffee here, a snack there, a soda at the desk, so the acid never fully clears and the enamel never gets a rest. A small child today can arrive at the dentist with a mouthful of decay before starting school, something that would have been almost unthinkable in a medieval village. Untreated tooth decay is now one of the most widespread health conditions on the entire planet, sitting in the mouths of billions of people at once. We fight it with everything modern science can build, and we fight it precisely because we flood our mouths every single day with the one substance that starts it. The medieval peasant won that particular battle without lifting a finger, for the simple reason that he was far too poor to lose it. That is the honest shape of the thing, and it is stranger and better than the myth. Medieval peasants did not have better teeth because they held some lost secret of dental health. They were not wiser than you, and they were not more disciplined than you. They were poorer than you, in the one narrow way that happened to protect their enamel. Their mouths were spared the cavities because sugar was simply a thing they could not get their hands on, and they paid for that spared enamel in a different currency altogether, in grit and grinding and abscesses, and teeth worn down to aching stumps by the very bread that was keeping them alive. So were their teeth actually better than yours? In the one way the headline promises, honestly, yes. If you measure a mouth only by counting the holes in it, the medieval peasant beats you, and it is not even close, and the reason is sitting right there in your sugar bowl. But a whole mouth is more than a count of cavities. Theirs were cleaner and far more painful. Yours are under constant attack and far better repaired. If you could truly trade mouths with that young woman in the churchyard, you would be swapping your fillings for her worn stumps, your dentist's chair for a pair of iron pincers, your occasional cavity for a jaw that ached its way toward toothless middle age. Almost nobody, offered that trade honestly, would take it. The clean count is real, but it is only one line in a much longer and much harder story. What the skull in that churchyard really offers is not a lifestyle to copy, because nobody alive wants sand in their bread and a blacksmith for a dentist. It is a mirror. It shows you, in worn enamel and blackened royal teeth, that the thing quietly rotting your mouth was never a failure of brushing. It was the sugar all along, it always has been, and a 1,000-year-old jaw pulled out of the English soil has been trying to tell you exactly that the whole time. If you like history told straight, subscribe and stay with us. What would you miss more, sugar or your dentist? Tell me below.